1 second. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Modern Data Enterprise platform track discussion. My name is David Engfer, solution architect and principal consultant here at Pariveda. I've been with the firm for over 10 years now, and my hope is today that everyone's going to walk away with something real tangible from a thoughts and takeaways perspective when it comes to building data platforms. One last reminder, we will be doing the Q&A at the end. So join up on slido.com, use the MDE channel, and then select the platform track. And if you're already there, just hit the drop down where it says overview at the top left, and select the platform breakout session. But let's dive in. So today we'll cover by what is the modern data platform itself, its place within the modern data enterprise, and why are we talking about this now? How has the landscape changed? We'll dive deeper into the platform evolution itself and maturity. And then finally, hopefully close on some next steps that you can take back. So in this discussion, we're going to focus in on one of the pillars of modern data enterprise, the data platform. It's the most technical and tangible aspect itself. The platform is the foundation, but it won't succeed unless it's hinged with the other two pillars of value and governance. In fact, in isolation, the pillars don't really mean a lot, but when you combine them, that's when you can really drive the value realization. So while we're talking about the data platform in this track, and that might be your focus, I really do encourage you after the fact to go and watch the recordings for the value and governance tracks, because in order to get that full picture, you're really going to need to see all three aspects. But why don't we start off by defining what do we mean by data platform, because that can sound very generic. Well, when we define a modern data platform, we define it as a collection of services and applications that manage, govern, and expose the data products within an organization. Notice the emphasis on the phrase collection of services and applications. It's no longer just one tool to rule them all. You know, the most effective way that we've seen to build up these loosely coupled services that grow and expand over time is to enable the right feature sets for the right use cases at the right time. A common theme you'll hear across the MDE approach is that value realization drives the enablement itself. Imagine trying to take on a monolithic project to build out every conceivable capability or edge case. It simply won't work in this day and age. And of course, the whole point of building this data platform is to enable the analytical capabilities of your organization and actually achieve value. By centralizing and normalizing some core technical capabilities from data access and storage and visualization and others, but still allow for some management and ownership to be decentralized, you can go a long way to setting up your organization for a complex task like instilling proper data governance. But why are we talking about this? What's changed in the past 30 years or 20 years that caused us to talk about this now? Well, there's been some key trends and disruptions in the data space in the last 5 years that's really required a rapid evolution of the platform. You think about real-time analytics. It used to be, 5 years ago, it was just a pie in the sky, a nice to have, we'll get to it later. But now what we're seeing is the market leaders are really, the rear view mirror analytics are not as acceptable as it was 5 years ago. We're now starting to see business end users starting to be able to, they want to use the data within 15 minutes of a particular change or see analytics measured in minutes instead of hours or days. We're also seeing democratization at scale. We're seeing more people that want access to the platform from business power users and access to the raw data itself. It's also needs to scale, it needs to be cloud native, needs to be relatively cheap to scale. We're also seeing that predictive analytics is becoming a necessity and a requirement. Artificial intelligence and machine learning used to require PhDs to be able to activate that capability. Now the technology has become commoditized enough that average programmers can actually take advantage of it. So predictions of behaviors, warnings, and outcomes is becoming fundamental. We need the ability to be able to rapidly experiment on a data platform. These data scientists or the power users want to be able to grab this data set and this data set relatively quickly and join it using their own preferred interfaces, more than just SQL, right? They want to be able to use R or Python or some of the other different technologies. And finally, we're seeing product management theory being applied to data itself and treating it as a first-class citizen. Having consumers and backlogs and product owners, and we're seeing paths to monetization and profit centers are being expected. What does this all point to, all these different trends? One thing, change. Right? So we have to be able to keep up with change, but how does the technology itself keep up with this change? Well, change has been happening over the past 20 to 30 years, and the rate of the change itself is accelerating, faster than any singular technology can actually handle. You think about when it started with databases, making data available and accessible and queryable in a standard format. But then you were left with some of these silos, so that's when the birth of in this fractured landscape, the data warehouse came along to consolidate it. A lot of structure and process was given to a singular team and platform, and it was the birthplace of data governance and business intelligence itself. But then the landscape changed again. Big data came out with all of its 5 V's: velocity, variety, volume, veracity, value. And that's a mouthful. And everyone was saying, hey, we just collect a bunch of data in its raw form and don't throw it away. Well, that became very expensive to do from trying to scale out large EDW clusters, to the tune of multi-millions of dollars to scale large EDW clusters. The effort was also spent, in the EDW when we tried to do that, on reducing the data volume and query optimizations. But at the end of the day, data scientists just wanted the ability to be able to experiment and join a few different data sets in Python, but they were left with SQL only in a few weeks or months to get the new data sources on board through EDW, through design and governance, before they can even join the data. So that's where that agility and freedom birthed the data lake. Right? It sounded refreshing. Just place the data in a raw form in a cheap, scalable, cloud-capable platform and just go. Well, the problem with that is governance just went out the window and it turned into the Wild West, right? It turned into the data swamp. After a few jobs and some evolution, there was no governance, no lineage, no trust in the data. People were asking questions, where in the world did this data come from? And they couldn't answer it because of there was no tracking of all the jobs and the evolution that came through. People just said collect the raw data, but it led to a lot of useless data in the actual platform. And then finally, even understanding what data was in the lake itself became extremely difficult because it required you to have a Linux background and be able to query it and be able to understand it. So this chaos led to the next evolution of the data platform, which is where we're at now, the data mesh. Data mesh is a collection of tools and services. It's decentralized data that brings in that product management theory and applies it through data stewards and data owners and treat the data as it had customers and its own data customers and consumers. You think about the context of this conversation, when we talk about modern data enterprise, it really is around building a data platform that's that data mesh itself. Even though the data might be decentralized in the ownership, there still needs to be a hub of governance and discoverability. Who owns the data? What version is golden copy? How do I integrate with it? Answering a lot of those questions. In the data lake, this was a huge problem, so along came the birth of the data catalog, which we'll talk about in a little while. All this to say, it's really hard to deliver value on something that's in constant evolution. So we need to have a platform that will morph as we go and evolve through the use cases itself. So this all sounds great. We'll just build a data platform and all the business outcomes will be achieved and we'll all be happy individuals. So why don't more organizations do this? Well, let me ask a question. Has anyone ever experienced firsthand or secondhand of a platform that has tried and failed? Probably several of you know of one or have experienced it. Well, there's a number of common pitfalls that we've seen, and we've surfaced the 3 most common ones here. The first one is focusing too much first on ingesting the data, right? We're just focusing on data source adoption. The problem there is that the assumptions that we had from the beginning aren't necessarily valid as we move forward. And it's really hard to predict the future or have a crystal ball. And then the value doesn't ever get necessarily realized in a quick turnaround. The second one is experimenting too much, which is to say, you build too many one-off use cases without any consolidation into a platform in mind. So you have a bunch of prototypes or POCs, and that's a good way to deliver short-term value to the business. But the key is to get out of the POC phase and start adding in those capabilities that are shared, so that you can have the hubs of governance and value and discoverability. The last one, planning too much. It's too much in this instance means over-architecting a data platform up front, going into a dark hole for 6 months and then coming out with the platform and then build it with and they will come mentality. Even by some miracle, we were able to ideate all the possible use cases up front. It's really hard to construct that perfect data platform that you've spent months for planning. And all of this to say all of these realize or get to a point where there's a potential for value not to be realized. And these things can tend to be expensive if they're not anchored in ROI. So let's discuss how do we evolve a data platform and counteract some of these pitfalls. So meet Data Forge. This is the way that at Pariveda, we deliver value from a source to a consumer. It's through data products, through pipelines, and through a continuous value realization. It's an overlay of all three MDE pillars and how they interact. And it's a set of frameworks with an overarching methodology that ties them all together. It's rooted in foundational technologies and capabilities that enables outcomes. It also includes a rapid experimentation and prototyping, also known as a data lab environment, so we can survey and adapt. It's also tied to a use case driven approach with concept cards that identifies the idea, the future, the data sets, the temperature, the size arms, et cetera. And I encourage you to go check out the value track to learn a little bit more about that. It's also comprised of reference architectures for different cloud environments, data ingestion and access patterns, and detailed capabilities mapping, and how to evaluate and select some tooling that are appropriate at the right time. And I won't dive into all the details here, but I'd rather explain it to you. One of the key Data Forge frameworks that we utilize for organizing and building data pipelines is IMETD, IMETD. It's broken down the traditional letters of ETL, extract, transform, load, or ELT in some organizations into a few more fit-for-purpose stages. Ingest, model, enhance, transform, and deliver. With the goal here of delaying transformation of data just in time until you have those delivery needs instead of trying to transform it up front. And I won't walk through all the details that you see below, but it's better to think about one of our clients' descriptive analytics use cases. They needed a front-end web app, which needed an API to expose the data, a couple of data products comprised of ingesting 2 data sources, one real-time, one batch, followed by some modeling and some deduping, and then all summarized together with some aggregations and exposure through a cached API. So we started with the use case in mind on the right side and understanding how to deliver it, but then we built it left to right. By isolating the steps, we can take the teams and individuals and we're able to focus on the concerns or capabilities that are most relevant for the stage that we're in. The resulting data products were reusable and published to a data catalog later so that they could be discovered. You'll find that the steps of ingest, model, and enhance are generally speaking within one data source, whereas in a multi-data source integrations usually start to occur within the transformation step. This can be done on any technology. Sometimes you'll find that the model, enhance, and transform can happen in the same step. We like this overall approach of IMETD because it encourages right to left thinking, starting with the ROI and the value, and then going back and building the data products that enable them. We think about traditional approaches that have come with a build it and they will come mentality, but that doesn't really work when it comes to building modern data platforms. The key here is to start from the use case, anchor it to value so that you know it's going to stick around, and then build it left to right. So how can we practically apply this left to right thinking? Well, for organizations that are creating an advanced analytics capability, the platform that enables the ability to repeatedly deploy, test, and run these value-realizing products is essential. Pariveda utilizes, as part of Dataforge, a continuous value realization framework. We start by identifying a backlog of use cases, outlining the scenario, the value, the outcomes, the data sources, do we have them, and then prioritizing them by hard or soft ROI. We then start to build an experimentation platform to enable data scientists or end users to quickly determine the feasibility of some of these ideas. Because what you'll find, especially as you start to get into artificial intelligence and machine learning adoption, is that there might be a lot of really great ideas or interesting ideas, but when you get into them, you'll find that the data is not there, there's holes in the data, and so you'll end up archiving a lot of different ideas as you start to build it. So you're going to want to understand really quickly before you get into production if some of those ideas are valid or not. Once you've identified or surfaced a key idea that it's time to move into production, you're going to want to start to expand the core capabilities of the platform itself and operationalize it into a production application. Thirdly, we'll want to make sure that we enrich the standard health and performance metrics with use case driven ROI or key performance indicators to really prove the value of the platform itself and its adoption. How many people are using it? How many times are people using certain data sources? And finally, we'll want to move into deriving insights from the performance, the cost, the ROI, the use cases that we archive, and that helps aid the business strategy and reprioritization. And this again will be very important once we get to AI ML enablement. So, how do we build capabilities into the platform itself? Well, we align them with use cases. Earlier, I defined the data platform as a collection of services and applications. Well, we can divide that collection into two parts. There's core components that are common to all of the majority of the use cases, and those that are really use case specific components. Here we have some listed in both categories. In the core, we can't really envision a data platform with some kind of data catalog, maybe a lake and some logging and monitoring components. Now, some of these other aspects like authentication and access control fall here, but may not be actually short-term or even long-term needs for your organization. Maybe building everything in an ultra lockdown VPC and AWS is enough if you're just building some internal analytics capabilities with a really small user base. So if you have access control at all, it's pretty minimal, and that might be okay. Other situations might require the exact opposite, where you might need to build some of those components upfront. The other set of capabilities that we're talking about is use case. We think about use case components, it's stuff that's actually built along or specific to use cases themselves. Experimentation, for example, is called out as a component to enable data scientists or analysts to be able to provision data for ML tooling like SageMaker or visualization tech like Tableau, Redshift, et cetera. Data usage is another example here. This could be a security or compliance-driven requirement when you're trying to capture logs of who accessed what. But it could also be more of a business-driven feature where you're trying to measure the ROI of the data products or services to determine which services or use cases are actually driving them. A modern data enterprise or modern data platform should evolve as the organization matures, both from a raw business perspective and also from an analytics perspective. When we think about unknown or future, that there's a section there that we don't, of things we don't yet know or don't yet need to focus on. As an example of this, we worked with a product manufacturer who is just now equipping their products with smart IoT features. And we worked with them about 5 years ago, and streaming capabilities would have fallen squarely into this unknown use case or a backlog perspective. Today, they actually fall into future state because soon, they will actually need these capabilities. And so today, they're actually starting to look at it. All of that says to me is that we need to have an evolutionary data platform. We need to take capabilities, define which ones are core, and then figure out how do we sequence across with different use cases when to light up or activate certain features or capabilities. As a more practical example of that incremental capability, I'd like to use this locomotive analogy. If you think about a locomotive, it builds and builds and builds to speed and takes advantage of the existing inertia. Well, you'll find out if you use a use case driven approach to building your data platforms and anchoring it to value, they'll stick around, but you'll also see the value to be able to be accelerated from use case to use case. You think about the first example here, we have an order tracker. Maybe the first one you take on is the descriptive analytics use case. You build in a data catalog, maybe getting some data in and out of the platform. And these are some of these different components you can actually use later on in future use cases. And I've condensed this here down to just 4 different use cases, but what you'll find is that sometimes you'll start to see overlap. You might not see overlap in the first 3 use cases, but you definitely will in the first 25 to 50 use cases will start to take advantage of that overlap. The second use case you might dive into is building a sales forecast, a predictive analytics use case. Well, you don't need to rebuild all the capabilities that you did before. You'll just add the 2 new ones that you need. Maybe you need some async ingress or some Spark egress as part of that, and adding just an additional data source. You also notice that the familiarity of the people that are involved will increase over time. And all of these will start to build and build and build so that you'll have to build less things or rebuild all these different capabilities in this operational platform as you move on. So to have a more practical story around an actual evolution itself, I want to take you through this evolution. And we won't necessarily dive into all the different pieces of the graphs here. I'll talk about some overarching themes to pick out from here. The manufacturer client that we built this platform with started as a simple use case to process some customer forms and then service them through an API. It started out as a basic data lake build with some common APIs for data getting in and out, which is relating this to the IMET-D platform. We think about ingestion. They created a separate mechanism to ingest the data and store it in some S3 buckets. They also had Elastic MapReduce to do some of the modeling enhancement data processing, and then transformation delivered were handled by Lambda and the API gateway. The next step of the evolution was discoverability through a data catalog, right? And that would enable the additional use case technology to be able to allow for that people to understand what data do I have in the platform. In this particular scenario, it was more of a custom data catalog that needed to be built because they wanted some purpose-driven business features that at the time weren't available in some of the data catalogs. But we'll talk about in a moment how we can use off-the-shelf items to actually to sometimes simplify your architecture. The next evolution in the platform itself was enabling a machine learning experimentation data lab to really activate the data scientists that they had to be able to query, request for data, stage data, move it through, and do all the appropriate lifecycle events you would need for machine learning. After building out the data lab environment, we operationalized it through MLOps. But one of the things here to point out is that you'll see that there's a lot of icons and complexity starting to really ratchet up. So it's really important that you have the value and governance pillars ironed out so that you can really realize the value at scale. The next evolution came with use cases for security and compliance to have some discoverability in the platform itself. And then it came along with some use cases for data marts and self-service products. Again, the importance of the governance and value itself continue to play key roles here. You'll find that tooling itself can advance the platform itself as you evolve through maturity and over time. If you remember, we had the EMR cluster for ingress and eventing mechanism. Well, that can be simplified with the Databricks Spark job. The custom data catalog, much simpler with a platform like AWS Glue Data Catalog or some of the other off-the-shelf products like Alation, et cetera. The nice thing about the new tool evaluation along the path is that it allows you to enable new capabilities within the same tool set. So you can take advantage of the shared capabilities. So now we can take advantage of the Databricks jobs for scheduling or security and access controls that it offers. Speaking of tooling, there's a whole heck of a lot of tooling to choose from when you're building data pipelines in the platform. And it can be overwhelming. Some of them have different capabilities. Some of them have overlapping capabilities. So how do you choose which ones of these technologies are going to be applicable for your platform? The key is to select and sequence tooling to enable the right capabilities at the right time. With DataForge, we start with those concept cards to find those anchor use cases. And then we also build a prioritized capability map. Then we select the tools that enable the most shared capabilities for those use cases and balance those with all of those other words that end in the suffix -ity, affordability, scalability, maintainability, etc. Then we score, refine, and select vendors applicable for the capability that we're looking for, and then roll out those tools along with the use cases for that continuous value delivery and incremental capability enablement. So where do we go from here? What are some tangible things that we can take as next steps? So our advice is to take the time to understand where you are today so you can make the right decision to set the course to where you want to be tomorrow. We have a maturity model that addresses some of this. We have 4 stages of maturity, which are colloquially referred to as uncontrolled, reactive, proactive, and resilient. And we'll discuss this a little bit more here shortly. But we've ranked them against several different key dimensions, from vision or collaboration, how are people actually using the platform, data quality, security and compliance, etc. I won't drain each section of the actual maturity itself, but if you're interested in it, this is being recorded. You can use a magnifying glass to the slide itself, or you can reach out to us afterwards to continue the conversation and allow you to dive into both the signs and the symptoms and pain points for that maturity stage, as well as what are some actions for you to take with your platform and its evolution. From a personnel perspective, there are lots of things to work on. However, we've identified some key areas to focus on first from a platform perspective. And from an example, you'll want to focus first on some data ingestion patterns or tooling, pipeline enablement, and an experimentation environment. Again, you'll have the recording to come back to it and look at this in detail afterwards as well. And finally, a few closing thoughts on the data platforms discussion today. I wanted to provide some recommendations for some next steps on the journey to a modern data enterprise. And you might be at different spots here today within your organizations. Some of you might just be starting out, right? So you want to move from laptop to prod. Maybe some of you have tried some things on your local environments. Well, it's time to figure out how to take some of these POCs or pilots and achieve the actual value by operationalizing it. You're going to want to build your team, go to the gym, if you will, and build some new data muscles. Building a roadmap, having the capabilities for training people, tool acquisition, conceptual architectures. If you're currently underway already in building a platform, maybe focusing on project execution itself and working on establishing data governance and tooling. Something like making sure you have a data catalog that allows for that discoverability. Another one is switching to that right to left thinking and breaking data silos in the platform itself, taking advantage of cross-functional value and adding governance platform teams. If you're already established and up and running, starting to work on ensuring the platform has the ROI or metrics to be able to prove the adoption and value of the platform it's delivering, as well as a reprioritization methodology. And finally, some other things to do is to go watch the other tracks, like I already talked about. Watch the value and governance pillars and really understand how these play and they interconnect together. And then you can use the maturity model itself to self-assess where you're at to act. And just like going to the gym, sometimes you need to engage a third party to help build the platform, provide you the right forms or exercises, if you will, and guidance and direction, or upskill your team to leave you with a successful platform. And now I wanted to invite Sean Beard, who's Vice President of Emerging Technology, to join me in providing some final closing thoughts on the modern data enterprise.
Thank you, David. And thank you to everybody for attending today. Hopefully gave you a good view, a deeper dive into the platform, answered some of your questions, and hopefully sparked some new ones as well. So what we'd like to do now in kind of closing is bring this back from where we started in the beginning with what Ryan Gross and Ryan McFarland were presenting, was really bringing it back to the modern data vision, modern data enterprise vision, and the 3 pillars. And what hopefully during today's presentation, you saw how the platform really establishes the technology foundation that brings forward capabilities needed to build out a governance approach, and how those governance activities can then tie into the delivery of value. And that means that the key to moving forward in the modern data enterprise is to understand how those 3 pillars really interact with one another. So if you're in an uncontrolled state, what we're really doing here is this is a definition phase where we're going to look at our pillars and derive how are we going to drive value? What are our prioritized workloads? From a governance or operations perspective, what are the policies we need to really enable our teams to really drive out and find the value? And then looking at from a platform perspective, what is the architecture for that platform that we're going to need? Almost looking at what is the existing tool set lacking that we need? And we want to do that so we can quickly move into a reactive state. And in the reactive state, our data and analytics are still going to be using or doing the same tools that you have been using, but you're going to start really understanding what it means to execute a use case from end to end. And you'll start using a new minimally viable platform that will help you achieve that. And then you'll start to then get a feel for how are the operations and how are those policies coming into play that lead you into that interactive state. And this is where we really start to solidify the approaches, because we start to see how the pillars really interact with each other. And so you'll see how from a platform perspective, how we enable the operations or all the governance activities. You'll see how we're driving value by implementing our data pipelines and having that repeatable process. And some of the magic, if you will, is this also starts to give you new avenues for driving value out of your data. And you'll see this ideation approach present itself. And as those things mature, they start to really be about improvement and continuous improvement of those approaches and the overlaps of those pillars. And that gives you the ability to really kind of look at this as a one cohesive approach that the whole organization then gets behind. And like I said, it just is a continuous improvement of these, and that's what leads you to that modern data enterprise vision. One example I'd like to return to was one that Ryan Gross gave in the earlier presentation about the heavy equipment manufacturer who we helped build out a data platform that had about 700 users and the 40 or so different projects associated with it. Well, they have since reorged their organization to kind of lift the technology platform up as a central part of their strategy. And so that means that they are now going to market not just as an equipment manufacturer, but also as a technology provider. And they've been able, just by being able to unlock all the value from within their data. And none of that would have been possible without them moving into or moving towards that modern data enterprise vision. So as we kind of close and thinking about a few questions that you may have, or something, what should my organization be doing? Definitely give you a quick second to read through these. But the first two are really about the value pillar. What are our prioritized use cases? What are the things we're trying to accomplish? And then how can we go through and make those things happen to drive that value? The second two really start getting into the governance and the data operations side of the house of what are the capability gaps that I have in my current processes, or what are the different skill sets that I may need to add to my organization? And then the last one is really about how do we track value? Because all of this needs to drive towards driving out value out of the data. And so if you have any other questions or looking to have a conversation within your organization or would like to help facilitate that conversation, well, Pariveda, we're here to help. And we can work with you to tailor an approach that meets your needs, and we'll view it through that lens of across the 3 pillars of how we get improved maturity and how we can drive those pillars together. And what better way to continue that conversation than with a Q&A session. Now, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so we may be able to get one question in, but I would like to quickly introduce our panelists, David Engfer, who gave you the platform presentation. Myself, I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A, and I'd like to introduce Ben Reyes, who is a principal out of our Dallas office, and Al Vasquez, who's a principal out of our New York office. And all of our questions you can go through slido.com, just like you did before, and go to the platform breakout. Now, I realize that we only have a couple of minutes, but all of your questions will be answered. We will deliver them later. So let's start with the one at the bottom. While evolutionary design allows value to be delivered early, what are maintainability considerations as the data platform becomes increasingly complex? So I'll leave that popcorn style to the panel to jump in with an answer.
Sure, Sean, I'll start off by taking that one. It's a fair point of the evolutionary design and how do we think about maintainability. So when we talked about the pitfalls of planning too much up front, that doesn't mean zero planning up front, right? You still do need to have those common considerations that you build into the platform itself early on. It's just balancing creating too many up front versus one that moves along the way. And different organizations they're gonna take different sets of capabilities and make them more or less important. In the finance industry, security and compliance, because you get audits from the SEC all the time, all those security stories might become really, really important. And you might need to focus on building in security into your platform or detailed and fine-grained role-based access control up front. Other types of organizations, maybe not that level of complexity is required. So you want to spend your effort in building in other different considerations along the way.
All right, and I do see that we are at time, so I do apologize. We ran a few minutes long, but like I said, we keep the questions coming. We will answer them, and then we will make those answers available to everyone. So I'd say on behalf of the platform team, myself attending today, and please reach out to any of us because we will make sure our contact information is available, and reach out to any of us if you want to have more detailed conversations or if you'd like us to just bounce ideas off of us. But thank you.
Thank you, everyone.